In a small, quiet town surrounded by lush green hills and thick forests, there lived a man named Ethan. Ethan wasn't your typical outgoing type. He preferred the company of his cows and crops over people. He was a farmer just like his father and grandfather before him. His family had owned the same piece of land for generations. It wasn't just dirt and grass to Ethan. It was history, memories, and everything that made him who he was. Every morning, Ethan would wake up with the sun peeking through his bedroom window. The air smelled fresh, mixed with the earthy scent of soil and hay. After pulling on his boots and grabbing his hat, he'd step outside to start another day of work. His farm stretched across 50 acres, a big chunk of land filled with fields of corn, rows of apple trees, and even a little pond where ducks liked to gather. There was also an old barn at the edge of the property, its wooden beams worn from years of weather but still standing strong. That barn held countless stories, family gatherings, hard days of labor, and moments of laughter shared under its roof. Ethan's life was simple, predictable, and peaceful. He didn't need much, just enough food to eat, clean water to drink, and his animals to stay healthy. He spent most of his time tending to the land, fixing fences when they broke, and making sure the tractor didn't give out during harvest season. On weekends, he'd sit on the porch sipping coffee while watching the sunset, paint the sky orange and pink. Life was good. Quiet, yes, but good. But all of that changed one summer when a new neighbor moved in next door. Her name was Victoria Langley, and she couldn't have been more different from Ethan. Where Ethan was calm and reserved, Victoria was loud and flashy. She drove expensive cars, wore designer clothes, and always seemed to be talking on her phone. Everyone in town noticed her right away, not just because of how different she looked compared to everyone else, but because of the way she carried herself. She walked around like she owned the place, literally and figuratively. Victoria had bought the plot of land next to Ethan's. At first, no one thought much of it. Maybe she wanted to escape city life and enjoy some peace in the countryside. But soon rumors started spreading. People said she wasn't planning to live there quietly. Instead, she talked about building something big, a luxury retreat, whatever that meant. Some folks whispered that she might try to turn the whole area into a fancy resort or golf course. No one really knew what her plans were, but they all agreed on one thing. Victoria wasn't here to blend in. At first, Ethan tried to ignore her. He figured as long as she stayed on her side of the fence, he wouldn't have any problems, but it didn't take long for trouble to find him. One afternoon, while checking on his cattle near the boundary line, Ethan noticed something strange. A group of workers was walking around with tools and equipment, not on Victoria's land, but on his. They were measuring distances, sticking flags into the ground, and marking spots with spray paint. Ethan frowned. This wasn't right. He marched over to them and asked what they were doing. One of the men shrugged and said they were surveying the area for Victoria's project. When Ethan explained that this was his land, the worker just laughed and told him not to worry. It was probably a mix-up that Victoria would sort out later. That night, Ethan lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Something about the situation didn't sit well with him. Why were those workers on his property? And why did Victoria think she could just send people onto his land without asking? He decided to pay her a visit the next day to get some answers. When Ethan knocked on Victoria's door, she answered with a smirk. She invited him inside, though her tone made it clear she didn't care much for his concerns. Sitting in her sleek, modern living room, Ethan calmly explained what he'd seen. Victoria listened half-heartedly, nodding occasionally but never really engaging. Finally, she waved her hand dismissively and said, "Oh, don't worry about it. We're just clarifying the boundaries. You know how these things can get confusing." Confusing? Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Nothing about this felt like a simple misunderstanding. Still, he tried to stay polite. He reminded Victoria that his family had owned this land for decades and that he had papers proving exactly where his property lines were. Victoria smiled, sweetly, but there was a coldness in her eyes. "Well," she said, "paperwork can be wrong sometimes. Don't you trust me to handle this properly? Ethan left her house feeling uneasy. Trust her? Not likely. Over the next few weeks, things only got worse. Fences that had stood for years suddenly disappeared overnight. Trees near the boundary line were cut down without warning. And then, one day, Ethan found stakes hammered into the ground deep within his property, marked with bright orange tape. Each stake felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that someone was trying to claim what wasn't theirs. It wasn't just the physical changes that bothered Ethan, it was the attitude behind them. Victoria acted like she could do whatever she wanted, like rules didn't apply to her. Every time Ethan confronted her, she brushed him off with vague promises or outright lies. She even suggested that maybe he should sell her the rest of his land. Think about it, she said one day. You could make a nice profit and move somewhere easier. Let me take care of the hard work. Sell his land? To her? Ethan almost laughed. This wasn't just dirt and grass. It was his home, his legacy. Selling it would mean giving up everything his family had worked for. Besides, he didn't trust Victoria as far as he could throw her. He knew deep down that if he gave her an inch, she'd take a mile. As tension grew between them, Ethan realized he couldn't fight this battle alone. He needed help from someone who understood laws and paperwork and could stand up to someone, like Victoria. So, he reached out to a lawyer recommended by a friend. Her name was Amelia Hayes, and she had a reputation for taking on tough cases against powerful opponents. When Ethan met Amelia for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. She was young but sharp, with a no-nonsense attitude that matched her quick wit. As Ethan poured out his story, Amelia listened carefully, jotting notes and asking questions. By the end of their meeting, she leaned back in her chair and gave him a reassuring smile. "Don't worry," she said. "We'll figure this out together, and we'll make sure she regrets messing with you." For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let Victoria win, not without a fight. Ethan's life took a sharp turn after his meeting with Amelia. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he had someone on his side, someone who wasn't just going to roll over and let Victoria steamroll him. But as much as Amelia's confidence reassured him, Ethan knew this wasn't going to be easy. Victoria wasn't the type to back down, and she had resources that Ethan could only dream of. This fight was about more than land. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. Amelia wasted no time getting to work. She started by digging into every detail of the situation, leaving no stone unturned. Her first step was to hire a professional surveyor, a man named Roger, who came highly recommended for his honesty and precision. Roger spent 2 full days walking the property, taking measurements, and comparing them to official records. When he finally sat down with Ethan and Amelia to share his findings, the results were shocking. "It's clear," Roger said, spreading out maps and documents on Ethan's kitchen table. "These markers your neighbor put up, they're way inside your property line. There's no question about it, this is your land." He pointed to specific spots on the map where the discrepancies were glaringly obvious. According to the official records, Victoria's claims didn't hold water. The stakes she'd planted weren't just a few feet off, they were deep into Ethan's territory. But Roger also dropped a bombshell. While reviewing the county's files, he discovered something alarming. Victoria had filed falsified documents. Somehow she'd managed to submit paperwork claiming ownership of 10 acres of Ethan's land. The papers included altered maps and signatures that didn't match the ones on file. It was blatant fraud, plain and simple. Ethan stared at the evidence, his hands trembling slightly. How could someone do this? Falsifying documents wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. And yet, here it was, staring him in the face. Amelia, however, didn't seem surprised. She nodded grimly, her jaw tightening. "This is exactly what I expected," she said. "People like her think they can get away with anything because they have money and connections. But we're not backing down." With the surveyor's report in hand, Amelia began building their case. She interviewed locals who had witnessed Victoria's aggressive tactics firsthand. One elderly neighbor recounted how Victoria had shown up at his door offering to buy his small plot of land for a fraction of its value. When he refused, she threatened to make life difficult for him. Another farmer described how her construction crew had trespassed onto his property multiple times, damaging fences and equipment. Each story painted a picture of someone who cared only about profit, regardless of who got hurt along the way. Amelia also reached out to former employees of Victoria's company. Many were hesitant to speak at first, fearing retaliation, but a few agreed to share their experiences anonymously. One woman told Amelia how Victoria routinely pressured her staff to cut corners and bend rules. "She doesn't care about laws or people," the woman said. "All she cares about is winning, no matter what it takes." As the evidence piled up, Ethan found himself caught between hope and frustration. On one hand, he was grateful to have such a dedicated ally in Amelia. On the other hand, dealing with Victoria's antics day after day was exhausting. She didn't stop her attempts to intimidate him, even as the legal battle loomed closer. Cease and desist letters arrived in the mail almost weekly, accusing Ethan of slander and harassment. Victoria accused him of making false claims and trying to sabotage her business. She even went so far as to offer him a lowball price for the rest of his land, insisting it would be easier for everyone if he just sold out and moved on. But Ethan refused to budge. With Amelia's guidance, he learned how to document everything. Every interaction with Victoria, every letter she sent, every phone call. Ethan recorded it all, legally of course. He kept detailed notes, saved emails, and took photos of any damage caused by her crew. Slowly but surely, he built a paper trail that would prove invaluable in court. The tension between Ethan and Victoria reached a boiling point one afternoon when she showed up at his farm unannounced. Ethan was working, in the field, checking on his crops when he heard the rumble of an engine. He turned to see Victoria's shiny SUV pulling up near the barn. She stepped out wearing sunglasses and a designer dress, looking completely out of place among the dirt and hay. "What are you doing here?" Ethan asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Victoria smirked, crossing her arms. "I thought we could settle this like adults," she said. "You've made things unnecessarily complicated, and frankly, I don't have time for it. Just sell me the land, and we can both move on." Ethan shook his head. "This isn't for sale," he replied firmly. "And if you keep trespassing and lying, you'll regret it." Victoria's smile faded, replaced by a cold glare. "Be careful, Ethan," she warned. "You're playing a dangerous game. People who cross me usually end up regretting it." Her words sent a chill down Ethan's spine, but he didn't let her see his fear. Instead, he stood his ground, watching silently as she climbed back into her car and drove away. Once she was gone, Ethan exhaled deeply, realizing how close he'd come to losing his temper. He couldn't afford to let her get under his skin. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. That evening, Ethan shared the encounter with Amelia during one of their strategy sessions. She listened intently, nodding occasionally as he spoke. When he finished, she looked at him with a mix of pride and determination. "She's trying to rattle you," Amelia said. "Don't let her. We've got the truth on our side, and that's something she can't fake." Despite the mounting pressure, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for justice, for everyone who had ever been bullied or taken advantage of by someone like Victoria. And with Amelia by his side, he knew they had a real shot at winning. As the days passed, the community began to rally around Ethan. Neighbors stopped by to offer support, bringing homemade pies and kind words. Some even offered to testify in court if needed. Local news outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on Victoria's shady practices. Suddenly, Ethan wasn't just a lone farmer standing up to a powerful opponent. He was a symbol of resilience and integrity. Still, the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The trial was fast approaching, and Ethan knew it would test every ounce of patience and courage he had. But as he stood on his porch one night, gazing out at the fields he loved so dearly, he felt a quiet strength growing within him. No matter what happened next, he vowed to fight with everything he had. Victoria might have money and influence, but Ethan had something far more valuable: the truth. The days leading up to the trial were a whirlwind of activity. Ethan and Amelia worked tirelessly, piecing together every bit of evidence they could find. It wasn't just about proving that Victoria had crossed the property line or forged documents. It was about showing who she really was. Amelia knew this case needed more than facts. It needed a story, one that would resonate with the jury and make them see why Ethan's fight mattered. Amelia spent hours poring over old records, maps, and legal filings. She reached out to experts in land surveying, real estate law, and even forensic document analysis. One expert confirmed what Roger had already told them. The signatures on Victoria's falsified documents didn't match the ones on file. Another specialist pointed out glaring inconsistencies in the maps she'd submitted to the county office. These weren't minor mistakes. They were deliberate alterations designed to steal Ethan's land. But Amelia didn't stop there. She wanted to paint a full picture of Victoria's behavior, not just in this case but in her past dealings. With the help of a private investigator, Amelia uncovered a pattern of shady practices. In another town, Victoria had been accused of using similar tactics to seize property for a shopping center development. Though she'd managed to settle out of court, whispers of corruption followed her wherever she went. Amelia tracked down former business partners and employees willing to talk, each adding another layer to the portrait of a woman who played dirty to get what she wanted. Ethan, meanwhile, focused on documenting everything happening on his farm. Every time Victoria's crew trespassed or caused damage, he snapped photos and wrote detailed notes. He kept a journal, jotting down dates, times, and descriptions of every interaction with her. Sometimes, late at night, he'd sit at his kitchen table flipping through the pages, amazed by how much had changed in such a short time. What started as a quiet life tending to crops and animals had turned into a battle for survival. Despite the mounting stress, Ethan found strength in the support of his community. Neighbors stopped by regularly, offering encouragement and lending a hand whenever he needed it. One elderly farmer named Frank brought over a stack of old photographs, showing the Carter family working the land decades ago. "Your grandpa used to say this farm was sacred ground," Frank told him. "Don't let anyone take that away from you." Others shared their own stories of standing up to injustice. A young couple recounted how they'd fought against a mining company trying to dig up their backyard. An older woman spoke about battling a corporation that wanted to build a factory near her home. Each story reminded Ethan that he wasn't alone, that people everywhere faced challenges like his and found ways to overcome them. As preparations continued, Amelia reminded Ethan of the importance of staying calm under pressure. "Victoria, we'll try to rattle you in court," she warned. "She'll twist your words, accuse you of lying, maybe even act like the victim. But don't rise to the bait. Stick to the truth, and we'll win." To prepare, they practiced possible scenarios. Amelia role-played as Victoria's lawyer, firing off tough questions to help Ethan stay composed. At first, Ethan struggled. The thought of facing Victoria and her team of slick, expensive lawyers made his stomach churn. But with each practice session, he grew more confident. By the time the trial date arrived, he felt ready, or as ready as anyone could be walking into a courtroom showdown. On the morning of the trial, Ethan woke up before dawn. He dressed carefully, choosing a clean shirt and tie that made him feel presentable without being flashy. As he drove to the courthouse, his hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. His mind raced with thoughts of what might happen. Would the jury believe him? Could they see through Victoria's lies? Or would all their hard work come crashing down? When he arrived, Amelia was waiting outside the courthouse steps. She gave him a reassuring smile and patted his shoulder. "You've got this," she said firmly. "We've done everything we can. Now it's time to let the truth speak for itself." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with energy. Reporters scribbled notes, spectators whispered among themselves, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee. Ethan took a seat beside Amelia, feeling small compared to Victoria's entourage. Her lawyers wore expensive suits and carried leather briefcases stuffed with papers. They looked intimidating, almost untouchable. But Ethan reminded himself why he was here: to protect something far bigger than money or power. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Opening statements began with both sides laying out their arguments. Victoria's lawyer painted her as a visionary entrepreneur, unfairly targeted by a stubborn farmer clinging to outdated traditions. He described Ethan as unreasonable, someone standing in the way of progress and economic growth. When it was Amelia's turn to speak, she leaned forward, her voice steady and clear. "This isn't about progress," she said. "It's about fairness. It's about respecting boundaries, not just physical ones, but ethical ones too. My client has lived on this land for generations. He works hard, pays his taxes, and takes care of his community. And now, someone is trying to take it all away from him using lies and manipulation." Her words resonated with the audience. Even some of the jurors nodded slightly, their expressions thoughtful. Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they understood what was at stake. Over the next few days, witnesses took the stand. First came Roger, the surveyor, who explained how his measurements proved Ethan's property lines hadn't been altered. Then came neighbors and locals, sharing stories of Victoria's aggressive tactics and questionable behavior. One man described how her crew had destroyed part of his fence, leaving his livestock vulnerable. Another recounted how she'd tried to bribe local officials to approve her plans despite zoning violations. Amelia handled each witness with care, guiding them through their testimonies while keeping the focus on the bigger picture. She asked open-ended questions, letting their stories unfold naturally. When Victoria's lawyers tried to discredit them, Amelia countered with sharp, precise responses that left little room for argument. Victoria herself eventually took the stand, exuding confidence as she answered questions from her own attorney. She spoke smoothly, painting herself as misunderstood and unfairly attacked. But when it was Amelia's turn to cross-examine her, things shifted. Amelia zeroed in on the discrepancies in Victoria's paperwork, asking pointed questions that forced her to stumble over her answers. For the first time, cracks appeared in Victoria's polished facade. By the end of the trial, tensions ran high. Both sides delivered closing arguments, summing up their cases and appealing to the jury's sense of justice. Victoria's lawyer emphasized ambition and progress, urging the jury to side with someone bold enough to dream big. Amelia, however, appealed to their humanity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice soft but powerful. "This isn't just about land. It's about values. It's about honesty versus greed, integrity versus exploitation. My client has poured his heart and soul into this farm, not for profit but because it's his legacy. If we allow someone to take that away using lies and deceit, what message does that send? Where do we draw the line?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. As the jury filed out to deliberate, Ethan felt a mix of emotions: hope, fear, exhaustion. He glanced at Amelia, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. Whatever happened next, they had given it their all. And so, the waiting began. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker as the jury filed out to deliberate. Every eye followed them, watching their expressions for any hint of what they might be thinking. Ethan sat stiffly in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together, on the table in front of him. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders. This was it, the culmination of months of stress, sleepless nights, and relentless determination. The next few hours or days would decide everything. Amelia leaned over slightly and whispered to him, "Take a deep breath. We've done all we can. Now it's up to them." Her voice was calm, but Ethan could see the flicker of nervousness in her eyes. Even she couldn't predict how this would go. Juries were unpredictable, and no matter how strong your case was, there was always a chance things could swing the other way. Ethan nodded, trying to steady his breathing. Outside the courthouse windows, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the room. It felt surreal, almost like time had slowed down. His mind raced through every detail of the trial, the witnesses, the evidence, Victoria's smug face during cross-examination. Had they done enough? Would the jury see past her polished exterior and recognize the truth? Victoria, seated across the aisle with her team of high-powered lawyers, looked calm and collected. She flipped idly through some papers, occasionally, whispering something to one of her attorneys. To anyone watching, she appeared completely unfazed by the gravity of the situation. But Ethan knew better. Beneath that composed surface, she had to be feeling something. Nervousness, maybe even fear. After all, if the jury ruled against her, it wouldn't just mean losing this case. It would expose her fraudulent practices for everyone to see. As the hours dragged on, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense. Spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats while reporters scribbled notes or tapped away on their laptops. Some people left to grab coffee or stretch their legs, only to return moments later, hoping not to miss the verdict. Ethan stayed rooted in his seat, unable to focus on anything except the closed door behind which the jury deliberated. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bailiff called everyone back into the courtroom. The jury re-entered, their faces unreadable. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he watched them take their seats. The foreperson handed a slip of paper to the judge, who read it silently before nodding. Then came the words Ethan had been waiting for. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," the foreperson replied, standing up. The room fell silent. Ethan could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner above the sound of his own ragged breathing. Amelia placed a reassuring hand on his arm, squeezing gently. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't face it alone. The foreperson cleared his throat and began reading the verdict. On the matter of property ownership, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Ethan Carter. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. For a split second, Ethan didn't react. He wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Then reality sank in. They'd won. His land was safe. Relief washed over him like a tidal wave, and tears welled up in his eyes. Beside him, Amelia let out a soft laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. She turned to him, her face breaking into a wide grin. "We did it," she said simply. Across the aisle, Victoria's expression darkened. Her lawyer muttered something under his breath, but she cut him off sharply, glaring daggers at the jury. When the judge announced that Victoria would also have to pay substantial damages for her illegal actions, her composure cracked entirely. She shot up from her seat, her face flushed with anger. "This isn't over," she snapped, pointing a finger at Ethan. "You'll regret this," but her threat carried no weight now. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and several spectators exchanged knowing glances. Victoria stormed out, slamming the door behind her, leaving her legal team scrambling to catch up. The victory belonged to Ethan and to everyone who believed in doing the right thing, no matter how hard the fight. After the formalities wrapped up, Ethan stepped outside the courthouse, blinking in the bright sunlight. A small crowd had gathered, including neighbors and friends who had come to support him. Frank, the elderly farmer, clapped him on the back. "Knew you could do it, son," he said gruffly, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Others cheered and congratulated him, patting him on the shoulder or giving him hugs. For the first time in months, Ethan allowed himself to relax, to feel the warmth of community surrounding him. Amelia joined him a few minutes later, still holding the folder filled with evidence from the trial. "You deserve this win," she told him sincerely. "And honestly, I'm glad we got to work together. You're stronger than you think, Ethan." He smiled, genuinely touched by her words. "I couldn't have done it without you," he admitted. "You made me believe we could actually pull this off." As the celebration continued, Ethan took a moment to step away from the crowd. Leaning against the courthouse railing, he gazed out at the horizon. The field stretched endlessly before him, golden in the afternoon light. It was hard to believe that just weeks ago, he'd feared losing it all. Now, thanks to the efforts of so many people, and his own refusal to give up, it was safe again. But the victory wasn't just about reclaiming his land. It was about proving that honesty and integrity still mattered, even in a world where greed often seemed to rule. It was about showing that ordinary people could stand up to those who thought they were untouchable. And most importantly, it was about protecting something far greater than dirt and grass. It was about preserving history, family, and home. That evening, Ethan returned to his farm. The familiar sights and sounds brought a sense of peace he hadn't felt in months. The cows grazed lazily in the pasture. The wind rustled through the apple trees, and the old barn stood tall against the fading light. He walked slowly around the property, taking it all in, letting the reality sink in. This place was his, not because of a piece of paper or a court ruling, but because it was part of him. Inside the house, he poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the journal he'd kept during the ordeal. Each entry told a story of frustration, determination, and hope. He realized how much he'd grown throughout the process. Gone was the quiet, reserved man who preferred solitude over confrontation. In his place stood someone stronger, more confident, and deeply grateful for the support of those around him. The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Amelia, checking in to make sure he was okay. They talked for a while, laughing about the ridiculousness of the trial and marveling at how far they'd come. Before hanging up, Amelia reminded him to stay vigilant. Victoria's not the type to admit defeat easily, she warned. Keep an eye out, just in case. Ethan promised he would, though he doubted Victoria would dare try anything else after the public humiliation she'd endured. Still, he appreciated Amelia's caution. She'd been right about so much already. Why question her now? As night fell, Ethan sat on the porch, listening to the crickets chirp and watching the stars appear one by one. The battle had been long and exhausting, but it had also taught him valuable lessons about resilience, courage, and the power of standing up for what's right. He thought about his grandfather and father, both of whom had worked this land before him. They would have been proud, not just of the outcome, but of the way he'd fought for it. For the first time in months, Ethan slept soundly that night, knowing his land and his legacy was safe. The road ahead might still hold challenges, but for now, he allowed himself to savor the sweetness of victory. The victory in court should have been the end of Ethan's troubles, but life rarely works out so neatly. The days following the trial were a mix of celebration and tension. While Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of relief, he couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria wasn't done fighting. Her parting words, "You'll regret this," echoed in his mind, a reminder that someone like her wouldn't go down without a fight. And as much as he wanted to believe the worst was over, Ethan knew better than to let his guard down. News of the verdict spread quickly through town. Neighbors stopped by with congratulations, bringing pies, casseroles, and heartfelt thanks. "You stood up for all of us," one woman said, tears glistening in her eyes. If she'd gotten away with this, who knows what she would have tried next. Others shared stories of their own close calls with developers and corporations, thanking Ethan for setting an example. For the first time in months, Ethan felt like he was truly part of something bigger, a community united against greed and injustice. But not everyone celebrated. Some folks whispered nervously about Victoria's reaction. They'd seen her bulldoze her way through obstacles before, bending rules and silencing critics. What would stop her from doing it again? Rumors swirled that she was already planning an appeal or looking for loopholes to exploit. A few even suggested she might retaliate in ways they couldn't predict. Ethan listened to these murmurs quietly, nodding along but keeping his thoughts to himself. He didn't want to scare anyone, but deep down he shared their fears. Amelia stayed in touch, checking in regularly to ensure everything remained calm. She warned Ethan to document any unusual activity on his property, no matter how small. People like her don't give up easily, she reminded him during one phone call. Stay vigilant. Her advice stuck with him, and he made it a habit to patrol the boundaries of his land each morning and evening. He carried a notebook in his pocket, jotting down anything suspicious: a broken fence, tire tracks near the edge of his field, unfamiliar vehicles parked nearby. So far, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but the unease lingered. Despite the uncertainty, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Ethan returned to his daily routine, tending to crops, feeding livestock, and maintaining the old barn. The farm felt alive again, free from the shadow of conflict. Even the animals seemed more relaxed, as if they too could sense the change in the air. On weekends, Ethan spent hours sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon and listening to the sounds of nature, the rustling leaves, chirping crickets, and distant calls of birds returning home. These quiet moments reminded him why he loved this place so much. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fence damaged during the earlier disputes, Ethan noticed a car pulling up to the edge of his driveway. At first glance, it looked like just another curious visitor stopping to admire the fields. But when the driver stepped out, Ethan recognized him immediately. It was Roger, the surveyor who had helped uncover the truth about Victoria's falsified documents. "Thought I'd drop by and see how things are going," Roger said with a friendly smile. He held a clipboard in one hand and wore his usual work boots and hat. "Heard you won the case, congrats." Ethan shook his hand warmly. "Thanks, Roger. I couldn't have done it without your help. How's business treating you?" Roger chuckled. "Can't complain. Keeps me busy, that's for sure. But listen, I actually came here for a reason." His tone shifted slightly, becoming more serious. "I heard some chatter around town, people saying Victoria's not taking the loss well. Thought I'd swing by and double-check the markers we set up last month, just to be safe." Ethan nodded, appreciating the gesture. Together, they walked along the boundary line, inspecting each marker carefully. Everything appeared to be in order, untouched since the survey team had placed them. Still, Roger took meticulous notes, snapping photos and jotting down measurements. "Better safe than sorry," he muttered under his breath. As they worked, Roger mentioned something else that caught Ethan's attention. "You know, I've dealt with folks like her before," he said casually. "They always think they're smarter than everyone else. Sometimes they'll try sneaky stuff after losing in court, things that fly under the radar until it's too late." "What kind of stuff?" Ethan asked, frowning. "Oh, little things," Roger replied. "Like tampering with markers when no one's looking, filing nuisance complaints to harass you, or even trying to sway public opinion against you. Nothing major enough to land them back in court, but annoying enough to make your life difficult." Ethan absorbed this information silently. It made sense. Victoria thrived on manipulation and intimidation. If she couldn't win outright, she'd find other ways to wear him down. He thanked Roger for the warning and promised to stay alert. As Roger drove off, Ethan felt a renewed determination. He wouldn't let her tactics rattle him, not after everything he'd been through. That night, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the pages of his journal. Each entry told a story of perseverance, courage, and hope. Reading them now reminded him of how far he'd come and how much he'd learned along the way. One passage stood out in particular. "Sometimes, standing up for what's right means facing fear head-on, but every step forward makes you stronger." The words resonated deeply. Ethan realized that winning the trial hadn't just saved his land, it had transformed him. He was no longer the same man who had once avoided conflict at all costs. Now, he understood the importance of standing firm, even when the odds seemed impossible. He thought about his grandfather and father, both of whom had faced their own challenges on this land. They would have been proud, not just of the outcome, but of the way he'd fought for it. A few days later, Ethan received an unexpected visitor. It was Frank, the elderly farmer who had brought him old photographs of his family working the land. Frank shuffled into the kitchen, leaning heavily on his cane, and eased himself into a chair. "Got a minute?" he asked gruffly. "Of course," Ethan replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. "What's on your mind?" Frank hesitated, stirring sugar into his cup. "Heard some things about Victoria," he said finally. "She's been poking around my place asking questions about you. Says she's concerned about your farming practices. Claims you're neglecting your duties or some nonsense." Ethan frowned. "That's ridiculous. She's just trying to stir up trouble." "I figured as much," Frank agreed. "But I wanted to warn you. Folks like her don't play fair. Best to keep your head down and focus on what matters." Ethan appreciated the advice, though he knew ignoring Victoria entirely wasn't an option. Instead, he decided to take proactive steps. With Amelia's guidance, he drafted a formal letter to the county office requesting increased scrutiny of Victoria's activities. He also reached out to local authorities, ensuring they were aware of her history of aggressive behavior. By covering all his bases, Ethan hoped to prevent any future attempts at sabotage. As weeks turned into months, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such a tumultuous period. Ethan continued working the land, finding solace in its rhythms and beauty. The community rallied around him, offering support whenever needed. Though the threat of Victoria still loomed faintly in the background, Ethan refused to let it consume him. He focused instead on rebuilding and moving forward, cherishing the peace he'd fought so hard to protect. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan woke early to the sound of geese flying overhead. Stepping outside, he breathed in the cool air, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over him. This land wasn't just dirt and grass. It was a testament to resilience, integrity, and the enduring power of standing up for what's right. No matter what challenges lay ahead, Ethan knew he'd face them with the same strength and determination that had carried him this far. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to truly believe that brighter days were ahead. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan's life began to settle into a rhythm that felt almost normal again. The farm thrived under his care, and the fields stretched wide and golden under the autumn sun. But the shadow of Victoria still lingered, faintly in the background, like a storm cloud that refused to fully dissipate. Though she hadn't made any overt moves since the trial, Ethan knew better than to let his guard down completely. People like her didn't give up easily, and he remained vigilant, always keeping an eye on the boundaries of his land. One chilly morning, as Ethan was checking the fence line near the edge of his property, he noticed something strange. A group of men in hard hats were gathered just beyond the boundary, their equipment lined up neatly along the road. At first glance, it looked like they were preparing for construction. But what caught Ethan's attention was the fact that they were working dangerously close to his markers that had been legally verified and set in place after the trial. Ethan approached cautiously, his boots crunching against the frost-covered grass. "Excuse me," he called out, raising a hand to get their attention. One of the workers turned, looking surprised to see him. "What's going on here?" Ethan asked. The man hesitated before answering. "We're surveying for a new project," he said vaguely. "Orders from the developer." "Which developer?" Ethan pressed, already suspecting the answer. Before the worker could respond, another voice cut through the air. "That would be me." Ethan turned to see Victoria stepping out of a sleek SUV parked nearby. She wore a tailored coat and sunglasses, her expression unreadable behind the dark lenses. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Victoria removed her glasses and fixed him with a cold stare. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" Ethan said evenly, though his heart was pounding. Victoria smirked. "I'm not quitting, I'm adapting. You may have won in court, but this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Ethan clenched his fists, resisting the urge to snap back. Instead, he pulled out his phone and began taking photos of the scene, the workers, the equipment, the proximity to his markers. He also jotted down notes in his trusty journal, documenting every detail. "If you cross that line again," he warned, pointing firmly at the boundary, "you'll regret it. We both know how this ends." Victoria laughed bitterly. "You think your little victory scared me? Please, I've dealt with worse. This is just round 2. Without waiting for a response, she climbed back into her car and drove off, leaving the workers to continue their preparations. Ethan stood there for a moment, watching them warily. Whatever she was planning, it wasn't good, and he needed to act fast. Later that day, Ethan called Amelia to update her on the situation. She listened intently, her tone sharp and focused. "This sounds like classic intimidation tactics," she said. "She's testing you, seeing if you'll crack. Don't let her win this psychological game. Document everything and we'll file a formal complaint with the county office. If she steps 1 foot over that boundary, we'll hit her with trespassing charges so fast it'll make her head spin." With Amelia's guidance, Ethan filed the necessary paperwork, ensuring that local authorities were aware of Victoria's activities. He also reached out to neighbors, warning them about her potential plans and encouraging them to stay vigilant. The community rallied around him once more, offering support and solidarity. Together they formed a loose network, keeping tabs on Victoria's movements and sharing information whenever possible. Weeks passed and Victoria's crew continued their work, but always just outside Ethan's property line. It was clear she was walking a fine line, trying to provoke him without crossing into illegal territory. Ethan resisted the temptation to confront her directly, knowing that playing her game would only give her ammunition to use against him. Instead, he focused on strengthening his position, reinforcing fences, and maintaining open communication with Amelia and the authorities. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. As Ethan sat on the porch sipping coffee, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Amelia, containing a link to a news article. Curious, Ethan clicked on it and froze. The headline read, "Local developer faces investigation. Over fraudulent practices." The article detailed ongoing probes into Victoria's past projects, citing allegations of bribery, falsified documents, and unethical behavior. According to the report, several whistleblowers had come forward, including former employees and business partners, accusing her of systemic corruption. Investigators were now reviewing all her recent activities, including her attempts to seize Ethan's land. Ethan read the article twice, his hands trembling slightly. Could this finally be the end of Victoria's reign? He called Amelia immediately, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Did you see this?" he asked. "I did," Amelia replied, her tone triumphant. "Looks like karma caught up with her faster than we expected. Between the trial exposing her lies and these new investigations, she's in serious trouble. My guess is she won't have time to bother you anymore, not with everything else falling apart for her." Over the next few days, the story gained traction, spreading across local and even national media outlets. Reporters descended on the town, eager to uncover more details about Victoria's shady dealings. Investors pulled out of her projects en masse, leaving her financial empire teetering, on the brink of collapse. Legal battles mounted and whispers of criminal charges began to circulate. For someone who thrived on control and power, Victoria suddenly found herself cornered. Ethan watched it all unfold with a mix of satisfaction and relief. Justice, it seemed, had a way of finding its mark eventually, but he didn't gloat or celebrate publicly. Instead, he focused on what mattered most: his land, his family legacy, and the community that had stood by him through thick and thin. One crisp December morning, Ethan woke early to find snow blanketing the fields. The world was quiet and still, bathed in soft white light. Wrapping himself in a heavy coat, he stepped outside to take it all in. The barn stood tall against the horizon, its weathered wood dusted with snow. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the scent of burning wood into the frosty air. It was a scene straight out of a postcard, a reminder of why he'd fought so hard to protect this place. As he walked the perimeter of his land, Ethan reflected on everything he'd been through: the fear, the anger, the sleepless nights. They had tested him in ways he never imagined. But they had also taught him valuable lessons about resilience, courage, and the importance of standing up for what's right. He thought about his grandfather and father, whose memories lived on in every acre of this farm. They would have been proud, not just of the outcome, but of the man he'd become in the process. That afternoon, Ethan hosted a small gathering at the farm to thank everyone who had supported him. Neighbors, friends, and even Amelia joined him for a hearty meal of homemade stew and fresh-baked bread. Laughter filled the air as stories were shared, old friendships strengthened, and new ones formed. It was a celebration not just of victory, but of unity, a testament to what could be achieved when people came together for a common cause. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the fields in hues of orange and pink, Ethan raised a glass. "In gratitude, to family, friends, and the land we call home," he said simply. Everyone echoed the sentiment, clinking glasses and smiling warmly. Later that night, as Ethan sat alone on the porch, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The battle had been long and grueling, But it had also brought unexpected gifts: newfound strength, unwavering friendships, and a deeper appreciation for the simple joys of life. His land was safe, his legacy preserved, and his spirit unbroken. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt truly at peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he could face them, with grit, determination, and the love of those who stood beside him. The fight might have ended, but the journey was far from over. And as he gazed out at the snowy fields stretching endlessly before him, he realized something important. Some things are worth fighting for. And this land, his land, was worth every ounce of effort.